Hi, welcome to Pegasus Research Substack Week in Review Unscripted Podcast number 26. I am Thomas, the founder of and the author for Pegasus Research. I'm an economist, a military historian, and a U.S. Army veteran. If you like my content and want to support my work, please consider becoming a subscriber on Substack or support me on Patreon. The website will be in the description section of this podcast. Welcome, everybody. I hope that you're all having a good weekend. We'll go over the four articles that I wrote this week on Substack. Poland's military buildup, controlling its destiny. SpaceX's Polaris Dawn, more than a space tourism vanity project. The West Philippine Sea Newsletter, Volume 14. And as the summer campaign season winds down, peace talks are on the menu. Maybe. Okay, so we'll start with the Poland's military buildup and controlling its own destiny. Poland's military buildup has been in the process before the Ukraine war, but it has accelerated and has taken a form of more urgency as the Baltic region and NATO has become more of a focus region with a potential conflict with Russia. Poland is on the Baltic Sea and is also considered a Baltic region country. It shares a common border with Kaliningrad, which is the separated oblast of the Russians, which is their access to the Baltic Sea, along with Leningrad, of course. St. Petersburg. Leningrad was the old World War II name of St. Petersburg. Or actually, I guess it was not necessarily World War II, but it was post-communist revolution name for St. Petersburg was Leningrad. So I spent a lot of time studying World War II history in the East, and I still have a knee-jerk reaction to call St. Petersburg Leningrad, and I want to call Volgograd Stalingrad. So excuse me on that. So the military buildup in NATO has been ongoing since before the Russian war, but again has taken more of a focus since the invasion, as the Baltics is probably considered the most likely flashpoint for a future war. And Poland has also run into issues where it has had Russian missiles landing inside its territory. Also, there was apparently an anti-air missile, an air defense missile from Ukraine that landed in trying to intercept a Russian attack, and the missile actually ended up landing in a Polish farm, killing 2 people. So Poland has had some effects, along with some other of the frontier countries on the Baltic and the southern Russia or southern Europe have had issues with incursions. Well, Poland this week, for I believe the 4th time, has launched, had to scramble its fighters in reaction to a Russian attack on Ukraine, where the missile tracks were heading towards Lviv in western Ukraine, close to the Polish border, causing a NATO and Polish alert in that region. So it's definitely been a tense area. Also, Poland and Russia have a not positive history that dates back to World War II. Actually, even prior to that, the Soviet Union and Germany had a secret agreement, carved up Poland in September 1939. Poland was occupied by the Soviet Union after the war, despite having a free Polish government in London during the war. The Catton Forest massacre, where Soviet forces killed Polish officers that they captured when they invaded Poland in September 1939. So there is a definite acrimony between the two countries. even though Poland was a part of the Cold War bloc for the Soviet Union, it was a pain point, especially in the 1980s against the Soviet Union. The Gdansk revolutions, like Vilesa. So even the Pope John Paul II came from Poland. So Poland has had a acrimonious history with Russia, and the fact that they're at war so close to the Polish border, and that Russia invading Ukraine, just as Ukraine serves as a buffer state for Russia, Ukraine serves as a buffer state for Poland. So they have definitely not wanted the Polish frontier be there with basically under Russian control. So it's definitely been something that has been an issue. And to the point that Poland is consistently launching fighters and alerting its air defense in reaction to Russian attacks on Ukraine that approach close to the Polish border. The Russian deputy chairman of the Russian deputy chairman of the Security Council, Dmitry Medvedev, who often represents the hardline elements in the Kremlin, and he used to be kind of the second to Vladimir Putin, still close to Putin, but he doesn't hold the prime minister role like he used to. He suggested extending the Russian security buffer zone to the Polish border. Now, of course, this is a fear that Poland has had. Also, it is something that Mr. Medvedev knows is going to have a negative reaction by NATO. It suggests that Russia would occupy all of Ukraine all the way up to the Polish border. Again, talking about eliminating that buffer state. Now, does it seem possible that they can do that? No, the Russians are absolutely struggling in the region, trying to take parts of eastern Ukraine. I find it very hard that they could extend their offensive and take all of Ukraine when the eastern section of Ukraine it's on the Russian border. There is a fair large population of Russian descent, Ukrainians of Russian descent. Many of them identify as Russian. They speak Russian, not Ukrainian. And that's why it's been easier for Russia to occupy those regions, is because of the generally favorable people in those regions in parts of the Donbass, not all of Donbass, but in parts of the Donbass. And this is not something that the Russians could rely on if they extended all the way into Western Ukraine. So it is highly unlikely that they could do it. But the reason that Medvedev is saying this is that the U.S. is considering sending Ukraine long-range JASSM cruise missiles, which could strike deep inside Russia into unoccupied from the parts of Ukraine that are currently unoccupied by Russian forces. So what he's saying is to be able to protect Russia is they have to take over all of Ukraine because of these long-range JASSM cruise missiles that are being considered being sent to Ukraine. So Poland is generally in favor of this, but this is the Russian reaction, is that the only way they can solve this issue is by occupying all of Ukraine, which again is not possible in my opinion. They would have to mobilize, and mobilization in Russia is not a popular issue. It causes a lot of society issues. That's why he relies on volunteers and paying people to private contractors, getting foreigners to fight. Well, I mean, the Ukrainians are getting foreigners to fight as well. Not as many, I don't think, but they do get foreigners fighting on the Ukraine side. So the idea of mobilization in Russia is very unpopular and would probably undermine a lot of the current support that Vladimir Putin has. So he wants to avoid that. So he's not going to be able to occupy all of Ukraine without doing a massive mobilization that would be highly unpopular in Russia, and not sure if they could even sustain it economically. So that's where that's coming from. So Poland, considering all these threats and all this rhetoric and its concern, even prior to the war, of the Russians playing a role back into Polish politics or Polish sovereignty, has been a concern. So Poland has consistently been above the 2% GDP spending that's required by NATO countries on defense. And they're expecting by 2025 to have 4.7 to 5% of their GDP spent on defense. This is the problem. I think it's the second most as a percent of GDP of any country in NATO. It will make Poland, which they are now, the third largest armed forces in NATO, behind Turkey and the United States. But unlike Turkey, Poland wants to make theirs one of the most advanced militaries in the world. And they are spending significant amounts of money to get the most advanced weapon systems. Poland does not make a lot of weapons themselves. They are really reliant on receiving or buying weapons from other countries. Mainly European countries and the United States, but there's some other twists in that are coming. So Poland has really been committed to creating a capable armed force. Poland has also been an active participant in supporting the United States, both in the Iraq War, and I think Poland at one point was the third biggest contributor of troops to the war in Iraq, in non-combat roles, but they did have a significant role in the war, as well as helping with peacekeeping duties in the Balkans. So Poland has been active in its role as trying to make itself truly as a partner to the West and NATO in particular. So Poland, in its attempt to become with purchasing more advanced weapons, they've agreed to buy 32 F-35 Lightning II fighters on top of the F-16s that they currently have. And I think they have actually stopped using their MiG-29s. I think they are close to phasing out the last of their Soviet-era air assets. And they've agreed to buy hundreds of U.S.-made advanced AIM-120C air-to-air missiles, which are long-range radar-guided missiles for their F-35s and also for their F-16s. They have purchased 40. They have on order 48 Patriot air defense systems, and they have also just agreed last week to buy 96 AH-64 Apaches, which will replace their Hind D Soviet-era attack helicopters. And this is where you're seeing them purchasing a fair amount of Western, mainly U.S. Weapons. But Poland has also, and this is where it's very unique, Poland has entered in an agreement to purchase and manufacture 1,000 South Korean-made K-2 main battle tanks and K-239 multiple launch rocket systems to augment their current U.S.-made HIMARS systems. This was an unusual move that you're seeing South Korean-made military equipment being sold to a NATO country. And that's where you're seeing some of the activity where South Korea is part of what's called Indo-Pacific 4, IP4 NATO countries. Good portion of that is to make sure that South Korean military goods and wares are up to NATO compatibility standards. And again, South Korea does make very advanced military hardware. So it's not like they are buying substandard equipment, but it's making NATO is recognizing, because of this purchase from Poland, is that South Korea is a partner that could help with the manufacturing and development of advanced military equipment. The 1,000 K2 main battle tanks will be a number of, I think half are going to be purchased directly from South Korea. The other half will be manufactured in Poland under license to start seeing some type of buildup of Poland's own military manufacturing. This was done because mainly, especially after the start of the war, is the U.S. military, call it the military industrial complex, the military manufacturing could not keep up with all the new demands as NATO's defense budgets have increased 25% since the start of the war, the Ukraine war. So Poland, not wanting to wait years to receive U.S. orders, started looking elsewhere for advanced military equipment and found that South Korea has excess capacity to make advanced military equipment that is fairly close to NATO standards as is. And this has become attractive to NATO and Poland in particular. So that's where you're starting to see that where being the IP4 nations are becoming more and more relevant. The IP4 nations are Japan, South Korea, New Zealand, and Australia. So Poland's military buildup will enhance its influence within NATO headquarters, which is allowing it to assert its Eastern European perspective, which is something it's been trying to advance. Is the typical NATO view has been much more Western European centric. You understand when, of course, this is understandable. When NATO was created, it was the dividing line was the inter-German border, basically West Germany, and going westward. So that's where the influence of the traditional influence of NATO is. It's also, when you look at NATO, that's where the richest countries are. Of course, you got U.S. well to the west on the other side of the Atlantic. You got Canada, Ukraine, Great Britain, France, Germany being the richest countries. And so all those are west. And so obviously that they have a lot of influence, traditional influence, and they have economic influence. Where Poland, on the other hand, is they're in the front of especially the Ukraine wars brought this up, but Poland, along with other Baltic nations, mainly Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, have been bringing up the Russian threat in the east, and that the NATO needs to start thinking in terms of eastward focus. And the Ukraine war kind of bared what Poland was saying. Not saying that NATO rejected it, but they were not putting a lot of emphasis on that. And now, all of a sudden, it's become a major issue with NATO. And obviously, you look at the expansion of NATO since the war started, adding two other Baltic countries of Sweden and Finland to the mix, which makes, again, that Eastern European Baltic region as being the most important region. And Poland, with having the third largest military, and what it hopes to have is the most powerful military in the East, probably even to the point of overshadowing Germany. Now, Germany has a lot more potential because it has a much bigger economy, has a much bigger manufacturing base. There will be a point that the Polish will have probably an outsized influence at NATO headquarters just because of where they're located and the size of their military, especially if that Russian threat continues. And we can't see that even when the war ends and some type of a peace agreement, it's still going to be considered a threat because of the actions that Russia chose when it invaded Ukraine. So Poland's going to have more and more influence, and it's going to have the size of a military to keep that influence. Now, so this is going to be able to allow it to assert the European perspective, or the Eastern European perspective, the Baltic perspective on NATO headquarters. And again, having that size of the military, it will be a primary influencer in that region. And again, this should translate to having it more NATO, or having Poland having more say-so than what it's seen traditionally at NATO headquarters in Brussels. Now, despite its military capability as well, Poland is making a political decision to gain the influence that it has not had in recent history. I just talked about earlier at the part is where Poland has always been a pawn of other powerful countries. It's been in recent history, we won't go way back, but we'll just recent history, just what I said. They were, they had Germany, tense relationships with Germany prior to World War II. Obviously, World War II, that's where the war started. They were stabbed in the back by the Soviet Union because of that secret protocol that the Soviets and the Germans, Nazi Germany, signed. Then even before that, Poland's safety or security was guaranteed by both France and Great Britain. And when Germany invaded, France and Great Britain could do nothing to help them. Obviously, geographically, that was it was a stretch for them to be able to help. They did declare war on Germany the next day, but they weren't able to do anything other than to bring Polish forces or Polish refugees, also Polish prisoners taken by the Soviet Union. The British were able to pull them back to Great Britain, where they fought valiantly in both France in the post-Normandy campaign. They took Monte Cassino to break the, I think it was called the Gustav Line in Italy to free up going into capturing of Rome in 1944. So Poland had a significant role for a country that was overrun very early in the war. And of course, all the suffering that happened to the Polish people with the death camps and the extermination centers set up in Poland itself, such as Auschwitz, Treblinka, Sobibor, and the others. And Poland suffered the most casualties as a percent of the population in World War II, with something close to 25% of their population killed. Again, many of them Jews, killed in the death camps. So, and then after the war, even though they had a free Polish government in London that represented the Polish people, or the Polish government in exile, called the Free Polish Government, or again, the government in exile in London, the idea was that this was supposed to, when Poland was liberated, that they would be returned and they would become the rightful government of Poland once they're free. Then you had the Warsaw Uprising, prior when the Soviet Union, the Red Army was approaching the Vistula, and basically the Red Army, the Polish people uprose in Warsaw to fight the Nazi occupation, to free start freeing the city of Warsaw so that the Red Army could just walk in or would be in a better position to take the city. Where Stalin decided he was just going to keep the Red Army there and just let those Polish, non-communist Polish elements in Warsaw get killed by the German counterattack, and eventually they lost. And then once they were lost, then the Red Army decides to move into Warsaw. So the Soviets made a very purposeful decision to weaken Poland. Of course, Poland was occupied. The free Polish government was not allowed to return. It returned to power in Poland after the war. A friendly communist government was installed in Poland by Joseph Stalin. Then, of course, Warsaw Pact, the military pact of the Eastern Bloc led by the Soviet Union, was named the Warsaw Pact. So Poland was very much a pawn. This is where Poland is actually finally getting to the point where they, not only they've been free after the fall of the Soviet Union and have started becoming more and more influential in maintaining friendly relations with the power structures within NATO, mainly the United States, but has been a partner in NATO um, initiatives, NATO's role. They are trying to make sure that Poland, first off, has the influence to maintain its own destiny and have the military power to maintain its own freedom. So, ideas Poland will have the military power that it will not be at the whim of any other great power, and also that it will have the power, the political and military power, to make influence within NATO to start shaping politics within the coalition into something where Poland would have more say so in what's going on. So really, Poland is looking to set its own course, which it has not been able to enjoy, really, you could say, since prior to 1939. So this is a significant move by Poland, and they've had president changes in parties, but they are still moving towards this goal. So this seems to be a national decision of establishing Poland as both a contributing to the coalition, NATO coalition that it's part of, but also establishing itself as being not subject to the whims of great powers. And that's why I don't think that Poland would ever agree to becoming, allowing the EU, which Poland's part of, is a member of, Poland would ever agree to become a member or to allow the creation of a European Union army, because as Poland has got influence in the East with its larger army, and also because that's the focus, an EU army will most likely be influenced by the great powers. As I've written before, France is very much interested in the idea of an EU army shaped in the French designs. So you'll see a EU army dominated by France and Germany, probably to a lesser extent Italy, and some of the smaller powers. And what we'll find out is that Poland will provide the manpower and the military, but it will have very little influence within the EU itself, as most of that will move to the larger economies and the traditional economies of the EU. And again, they will still have some say-so at, if they stay separate and have a separate army and not an EU army, they will have a role in NATO headquarters to help influence policy. Well, if an EU army would assume to supersede any of the national armies within NATO, that would be a long way off. But I think that's why Poland will oppose the idea of an EU army. And again, it only takes one country to veto it. And so I think Poland is interested in standing as its own country within NATO and not agreeing to allowing itself to be watered down through EU in a ploy to create a European Union army. So that's my thing is, I think I wrote this because it's really, I see as Poland becoming a strong military power in Eastern Europe. It's along the front lines and is exerting the influence, and it's protecting its sovereignty in something that has not been able to do for quite some time. And even in the 1990s, when Poland played a key role in helping break the grip of communism, of the Soviet communism in Eastern Europe, Poland was, like many of the European countries, Eastern European countries, suffering under the headache of called the hangover of communism and having to convert their economies from a communist economic system to a much more free market system. And now you're just starting to see in the last 10, 15 years, Poland really starting to establish itself. And even now more so as this this Russian invasion has brought more focus to Eastern Europe. So it's definitely seen how Poland is not going to allow the past that it has been part of, and you could often say suffered to, they are not going to allow that to repeat themselves. And they will do that by maintaining a strong military, but they're trying to do it inside the coalition that they are part of. So again, they're not trying to get out of not being part of NATO, but they want to be a influential player and also at the same time protect its sovereignty within. Because again, it has a small economy. It'd be very easy for Poland to be ignored, but you can't ignore them if they have a large and capable military in a strategically important part of NATO. All right, so the next one is SpaceX's Polaris Dawn, more than a space tourism vanity project. So this started this week. Interesting. As SpaceX was getting ready to launch the Polaris Dawn mission, which was launched on Tuesday, the Boeing Starliner had successfully landed at White Sands Space Harbor in New Mexico on September 7th. So it was able to successfully land. So if the crew was on board, and they weren't, they were left behind on the International Space Station because NASA, through an abundance of caution, did not want to risk astronauts on a Starliner spacecraft that was having some issues, mainly around thrusters and helium leaks. So they didn't want to risk the crew, so they left them up in ISS. Well, the Starliner did successfully return unmanned to the New Mexico Space Harbor. So as Boeing Starliner is struggling to get, I don't know if a Starliner will ever fly again, but I hope it does. I like the idea that NASA has a backup to Crew Dragon. So Crew Dragon, so as Starliner has not, you could say Starliner has put a crew into the ISS, but they have not actually had a successful mission, which is send a crew up and safely return them to Earth. They have not been able to do that yet. Well, the Polaris Dawn mission, which is a privately funded space mission with 4 astronauts, is the 14th launch of the Crew Dragon, which right now there is, I think that means that because there's 2 SpaceX missions right now. There's Crew 8 at the ISS, and there is Polaris Dawn in orbit right now. So SpaceX has 14 successful launches and 12 returns, and why it's 12 returns is because they still have 2 Crew Dragons up in space right now. So the reason why I sit there and say that it's important that somehow that I want Starliner to be successful is what's been underreported, that SpaceX and its Falcon 9 have had a remarkable safety record, an incredible safety record, the best safety record that has ever been achieved by any rocket. And they're reusable. The first stage of the boost has been reusable. SpaceX has actually had 2 failures in the last 2 months, which highlights the dangers of space travel. Now, the reason why this is important is that if Starliner is basically considered grounded, we don't know if it'll ever fly. It's really up to Boeing if they want to continue on a project which they've lost, I think, at least $2 billion on and not have had a successful mission yet. This highly reliable Falcon 9 rocket has had 2 failures in the last 2 months now. It did not cause a failure in the missions. The launching of the satellites continued as normal. They were able to successfully do that, but they lost 2 boosters, which is highly unusual for SpaceX. But it just highlights the danger that if something catastrophic happens to the Falcon 9 and now Starliner's grounded, then we're hitching rides back up with the Russians to get to the ISS because both options to get up to space will have been grounded. So that's why I kind of cheer on wanting to see Starliner have a success as well as SpaceX with its continued success. So the point is, so on September 9th, SpaceX launches the Polaris Dawn mission, which is to be the first of 3 from the Kennedy Space Center from Launch Pad 39A, which they used to common pad that SpaceX uses for the Falcon 9 was also used for the Apollo missions and the space shuttle missions. So they launched the Polaris Dawn. So this is a highly risky mission, and it's a private space flight that is commanded by the Shift 4 CEO, Jared Isaacman, who is a billionaire. This will be his second time in space. He's helped raise money for St. Jude's Hospital for his first space flight where he's a passenger. And then this one he's commanding. I think he spent at least $52 million of his own money for the space flight. So this is again, I talked about this being a dangerous mission and a risky mission, especially when we know that, hey, Starliner's grounded. But again, space flight is risky, and that's part of the business. Also, again, with 2 Falcon 9 failures, it seems like a strange time to take a highly risky private mission that SpaceX is conducting. So they launched this Polaris Dawn mission, which was paid for by Jared Isaacman. They launched it, and the idea was it was going to push the limits of the Falcon 9 booster and the Crew Dragon capsule, aiming to reach the highest orbit ever achieved in human spaceflight. Now, they were going to go to a height of 700 miles above Earth, which is the highest, I think, since, it was Gemini 11, which went like 670 miles. Now, they will say that SpaceX makes the point too, is that man has not been this high into orbit since the Apollo missions. Well, you kind of finally divide. The Apollo missions went to the moon, and yes, they were in a higher orbit as they were working to break into their, I don't know all the technicals, but I think through translunar injection, there's a point where Earth's gravity gives way and passes over to the lunar gravity, that those are considered higher orbits for the purpose of orbiting the Earth. This SpaceX mission was the intent not to go to the moon, but an intentional high Earth orbit mission. So 700 miles up into the above Earth's orbit, which is 3 times higher than the International Space Station orbits. So it was able to successfully do that. And when I wrote this paper, it had not happened yet. But the Falcon 9 was able to get the Crew Dragon up to a 700-mile orbit. So again, that was the highest orbit ever attained. Also, that means that they were not had the full protection of the Van Allen belts, which basically are magnetic fields that keep most of the hard radiation off the Earth's surface. They were going to be exposed to solar radiation, I think, in the couple days the day that they were going to be up at 700 miles up, they were going to get the same amount of radiation that they would receive on Earth of equivalent to like 20 years. So it was a higher level of radiation for the crew. That's theoretically, they still have to determine once they get back to Earth what was their true radiation exposure. But it was able to successfully go to the 700-mile limit, pushing the limits of the Falcon 9 booster to get a Crew Dragon that high, and the Crew Dragon be able to operate that high. So that was a risky endeavor, but they felt like it was well within their parameters to do. And if the Falcon 9 couldn't do it, it just would have been put into a lower orbit. But they were really pushing the limits to get that high. Maybe they're just trying to get records, but that's part of so much about spaceflight is you have records so you can break them. The mission will also be the first time that Crew Dragon has carried out a spacewalk, and that was going to be down at a lower altitude, 470 miles or 760 kilometers. So they were coming to a lower orbit. They didn't want to be well above with intermittent protections of the Van Allen belt. So they didn't want to do a spacewalk at that extremely high altitude. So they did bring it down to 470 miles, which is about twice as high as the International Space Station. And so they were going to conduct the first private spacewalk ever. Now, this Crew Dragon in the Polaris Dawn mission has no NASA astronauts. Oftentimes, Crew Dragon carries its NASA astronauts, Soviet cosmonauts, or which I think they've actually only carried one, or is it Crew 9, I think is the first time that a cosmonaut will be riding aboard. Also ESA astronauts. So this is a case where Crew Dragon and SpaceX are carrying only their own astronauts. So these are not government astronauts or astronauts or cosmonauts of any government. This is strictly private, which is, I think, the second full private flight that SpaceX has conducted. So this was going to be the first time that there's been private citizens or private individuals conducting a spacewalk. Now, SpaceX obviously has spacesuits that they go, and they have those very sleek spacesuits that are not the big, bulky ones that we've been so used to seeing, that even Starliner uses those big, bulky, in their case, theirs are blue. They have very sleek spacesuits. Well, those spacesuits that SpaceX has been using for their launches were not able to be used for EVAs, extravehicular activity, spacewalks. So they had to create a new spacesuit for this, but they basically have kept the same design. There's the same still sleek design that they were on their normal spacesuits, which I think they were called IVA, intravehicular activity spacesuits. These spacesuits do not have those big backpacks like you see in the space station. They are just using, very similar to what you saw in the Gemini days, they will use a umbilical cord. In this case, I think the umbilical cord for the new SpaceX EVA suits are on the leg. And so, again, a very sleek spacesuit. Be interesting to see how these performed in the end. When looking at the spacesuit, the spacewalk on TV. Again, I wrote this paper before this any of these results spacewalk had occurred. It was they did not seem they had any issues. They didn't have anything like when Yuri Gagarin did his spacewalk. Was it Yuri Gagarin that did this first spacewalk? I think so. I might be mistaken on that one. His spacesuit got so big, he couldn't fit himself back into the airlock, and he had to start relieving the pressure in his spacesuit, which was basically lowering the pressure, which was exposing him to lower and lower pressures on Earth, which can cause all types of health issues. For him to finally get in there, they didn't have these issues, the spacesuits. So the spacesuits have been a big deal, and that's why the Artemis program has been one of the reasons the Artemis program has been delayed, because getting new spacesuits. So SpaceX was able to create EVA spacesuits that are very appear to be workable, tend to be look like they're much smaller, less bulky, which again, that means that you don't take up so much space in the in your spacecraft. Now, of course, these SpaceX suits can't be used in walking on the moon or other activities because they do require an umbilical support arm. So the other thing that stood out in the SpaceX walk was Crew Dragon does not have an airlock like you had on the space shuttle, not like what you have on the International Space Station. So much like Apollo and Gemini spacecraft, you had to expose, when you were doing your walk, you had to basically open up your capsule. So you had to expose the whole capsule to the environment of space, and that meant that they had to depressurize prior to opening. So that means even though only 2 of the 4 astronauts on Polaris Dawn were doing spacewalks, everybody had to don the spacesuits and be pressurized to be able to allow the 2 spacewalkers to go out. So they were able to do that. So that was the first time that was done. And again, that was the first time really at least for an American-based company, that you have seen that in the U.S. since, again, not since Apollo, that when they've had launches where they had to depressurize the entire capsule. Well, they haven't done that in a long time. Again, Space Shuttle had an airlock. ISS has an airlock, so they don't have to expose the whole atmosphere of those previous vehicles. So that was something new, and it was successful. So also, SpaceX is also this was the first approval for a flight to use the Starlink. First time for a manned flight to use the Starlink laser-based communication system. Obviously, all those Falcon 9 launches that SpaceX has done over the past few years has put a Starlink constellation satellite system that's still being built, but put it out there. It was able to provide for manned space flight the communications. And this is a big deal because instead of having a bunch of ground-based systems all across the Earth, and this was your communication is in orbit with, way I understand it, is an interlinking constellation of SpaceX Starlink satellites able to keep constant communication. Now, this stands out too because the Starlink satellites were able to, where normal reentry for all space systems they go through a blackout period where they're not able to communicate with Earth as they pass through Earth's atmosphere. It causes a radio blackout where they lose all communications. All ground-based systems lose communication with the aircraft. That includes telemetry outside of radar, and the radar is ground-based radar tracking the spacecraft. Well, Starlink has proved during the last, actually it was before that, but really we saw it on the last flight of Starship, the experimental rocket that SpaceX is developing, which is the largest rocket in the world, in the history of the world, even bigger than SLS, which is the monster rocket that NASA has developed for the Orion and Artemis programs. SpaceX was able to use Starlink to provide communication, including video feeds of reentry. That has never been done before. So it kind of got ignored, but the Starlink was able to provide, for the first time, communication and live pictures during reentry. So you saw the plasma fields build up during live reentry of the TV during that. Again, I think it's the fourth mission of fourth test mission, unmanned test mission of the Starship program. So this is a big deal where they're actually getting to the point that they're seeing that this SpaceX Starlink constellation can provide more reliable communications, not reliant on ground-based stations. And so also when you go to the ground-based stations, either they have to relay communications to each other throughout the world. You don't have to do that with the Starlink constellation system because the way it's been organized, it's pretty much in constant contact with any spacecraft. This Starlink laser-based system, they think will be able to be definitely used for communications to the moon, and they think it could also be used to communication to Mars if that ever comes. So this mission was considered part of space commercialization and technically space tourism because these people all paid, though I think the Jared Isaacman basically paid for most of the flight and for the people to be on there. So it's space tourism industry has been primarily serving the ultra wealthy and their chosen companions. Jeff Bezos has done that with New Shepard, which it's been basically kind of like it's basically become a billionaire vanity project. Now, why I feel like Polaris Dawn is different is because it was not, there was high amount of risk of this mission if it failed. And it actually created actual ways to push the Crew Dragon, and also when they're talking about the Starship going to the moon eventually, if it ever gets to that point, be able to collect information, how to use Starlink, how to the equipment that SpaceX is creating, can it be used for EVA? Be able to push a spacecraft to that high into Earth orbit. So there was a lot of new things that that SpaceX was able to do to provide actual real science that has not been collected for, the last Apollo mission was 50 years ago. So they were able to collect a lot of data. So there was actual risk when you're pushing the limits of this, and if something went wrong with the EVA, if something went wrong with the high Earth orbit, and Starliner being grounded, is you could have easily ended the U.S. role in ISS if the mission failed, if the Polaris Dawn mission failed, which was, again, ostensibly you could say that it was a space tourism mission that could have risked the whole space program. And the reason why I say the space program is that, okay, we can go hike a ride with the Russians at $50 million a seat, but as I jokingly say, I don't know if you've heard, but there's a war going on between Ukraine and Russia, and space has tried to rise above that, and largely it has, but you can't guarantee it, especially when you look at the head of Roscosmos has talked about wanting to unlink the Russian modules from the International Space Station and let the Russians go off on their own. Again, this is one of those crazies in the Kremlin that make Putin look like he's reasonable. It didn't happen, but again, there was a high amount of risk by doing this launch. I get it. There's risk in spaceflight. You have to push the envelope. You got to push where the equipment will go. But it did have a high amount of risk for something that was, many people have called just a billionaire vanity project. And when I say billionaire, I'm not talking about so much Elon Musk as I'm talking about Isaacman, the commander who paid his way onto the as commander. So very interesting. The spacecraft is still up there, but it has completed all the major tasks that it was wanting to complete, which was the 700-mile orbit, the spacewalk, two-person spacewalk, successfully using the suits with no issues, like you didn't see when the Russians first did theirs. You saw the use of the Starlink laser-based communication system. So it apparently met all the criteria for a mission. Also, being able to use the Starlink laser-based system will probably help with the FAA approval for future manned space flights outside of a private space flight that was conducted for the Polaris Dawn mission. So again, I'm always very interested in the space program, and I love talking about it. So it was kind of it was another request to talk about it, or write about it. So I was happy to do so. Okay, West Philippine Sea Newsletter, Volume 14. Unlike the previous few weeks, there has been no water cannon assaults up at the point I wrote this. I think I've actually read something that there was another water cannon incident in the South China Sea, but I have not followed up on that one yet. I'm sure it will be part of Volume 15 coming up. But that does not mean that it's been a quiet time in the West Philippine Sea. So there was no significant clashes, but there was, and so it's made the suggestion that there was reduced tensions. Well, that wasn't really the case. There is been fairly bad weather in the South China Sea. It is that time of year with unstable waters and rough seas, high winds, typhoons. So there is some unsettled weather, so that caused some of it. So there was no clashes at the Escoda Shoal, Second Thomas Shoal, or any of the other disputed waters or disputed islands, which really should not be disputed. They are part of Philippines' exclusive economic zone. They are not part of Chinese. The only reason they are disputed is because Chinese are trying to do extrajudicial claiming of territory that is not their own. So again, no clashes this week, like we had seen in the previous 3 weeks, where three ramming incidents had occurred at the Escoda Shoal, which is where the Teresa Magbanua is stationed at on a long-range patrol. But the Philippine Navy reported there was 203 Chinese vessels in the West Philippine Sea, which is the most in quite some time. Now, the 203 Chinese vessels included the Chinese Coast Guard, which has been the primary instrument for trying to enforce China's illegal claims in the Philippines exclusive economic zone, which, for new people listening, the Philippine exclusive economic zone in the South China Sea is referred to as the West Philippine Sea. So when you're talking about the West Philippine Sea and the Philippine exclusive economic zone, you are basically talking about the same area. So oftentimes those terms will be used intermittently. There could be some variations on it, depending on whoever's making their evaluation outside of China, because China just assumes everything's theirs in the South China Sea. So the West Philippine Sea is actually considered part of the larger South China Sea. But for sovereignty purposes, the Philippines do refer to it as the West Philippine Sea to kind of give it an identifier that this is Philippine waters. So the Philippines have recorded, again, 203 vessels. So the Chinese Coast Guard is out there, who is the primary enforcer of China's illegal sovereignty claims. Also includes the People's Liberation Army Navy, sometimes called PLAN or PLAN, and the maritime militia ships, which are basically they're called fishing ships, and they do have fishing ship functions, but they serve the Chinese Communist Party both at the local level and at the national level, and they help enforce the claims of China in the South China Sea, often performing those gray zone tactics by doing things that the Coast Guard or the Navy can't get away with. Oftentimes used to escalate tensions as well. Oftentimes, they'll use the maritime militia to try to go after government ships, whether U.S. Navy, U.S. Philippine, or Philippine ships, Coast Guard, or fishery ships. So the maritime militia was part of that. Also served as kind of an early warning to put more smaller ships out there to kind of keep an eye to notify the Chinese authorities of some type of activity, mostly by the Philippines, that the Chinese Coast Guard might be aware of. Of those 203, 70 of them are in or just off the horizon of the Escoda Sabina Shoal. Escoda Shoal is the Philippine name. Sabina Shoal has been called the legacy Western name for the shoal. So the 70 ships out there near the Sabina Shoal pose a threat to resupplying the Philippine Coast Guard ship, the Teresa Magbanua. Now, why this is important is the Escoda Shoal, Sabina Shoal, however you want to call it, has been the location of what was suspected as Chinese reclamation, where they were taking coral, grinding it up, and pouring it into the shoal to raise the seabed up to create an artificial island. The Philippines caught this in the spring or late winter, early spring. They caught they found evidence of this, and ever since April, they put their largest and most capable Coast Guard cutter, the Teresa Magbanua, out there to keep an eye on the shoal to make sure that the Chinese, do not start construction of the artificial island. So that's what the role of Teresa Magbanua. This is something that has been escalatory towards the Chinese, because they call it a virtual grounding. When they talk about virtual grounding, they're going back and talking about the Sierra Madre in the Second Thomas Shoal, where the Philippines intentionally grounded the Sierra Madre, a Philippine naval ship, to keep a manned presence in the shoal to help try to keep the Chinese from trying to claim or try to build an island on the Second Thomas Shoal, an artificial island on the Second Thomas Shoal. So when they call the Teresa Magbanua being an extended patrol, is what the Philippines call it, the Chinese are calling it an extended grounding, because they say they are accusing the Philippines of trying to create a permanent manned presence by keeping the Teresa Magbanua there. Is they are saying that the Chinese are saying that you basically just virtually grounded that ship, like you did at the Second Thomas Shoal, just to maintain a permanent manned presence in the shoal. So China this week has said they've released through, I can't remember what state-run newspaper it was, they have floated the idea of towing away the BRP Sierra Madre from the Second Thomas Shoal. Now, this is not new. They have threatened that in the past before, but they've gone in there and they've started saying that the second that the Sierra Madre is no longer a commissioned ship, and this kind of got slid by, saying, okay, this is no big deal. It's it's not a commissioned ship. So most readers of newspapers, they probably don't realize a lot about maritime law. And I would say I am not a professional maritime law either, but I know that when you say a ship is commissioned, it actually means something. So the Sierra Madre is an actual commissioned ship in the Philippine Navy. And the Philippines have made that point. The Philippine flag flies on there. Military personnel, mainly Marines, are on that ship. It is resupplied. They have maintained it on there as a commissioned ship. The Chinese are saying, no, it's a decommissioned ship. What a commissioned ship is, I had to pull up this other paper because I get my bullet points, so I'll actually be reading this one, is a commissioned ship is internationally recognized as the exclusive jurisdiction of the flag that is being flown, and those country laws apply on board. So here I'm obviously American, so the U.S. Navy, for example, a commissioned ship would be a ship that is built by a private company, turned over to the Navy. The Navy commissions it to, they give it a name, a roster number. It is manned by a naval crew, and it is basically sovereign territory of the country that flies the flag. So in this case, U.S. Navy. In the case of the Sierra Madre, the Philippines, because it flies the Philippine flag and has Philippine military personnel on there. And the laws of the Philippines apply aboard, just as they do with any other commissioned ship. Whatever the flag they fly, and it's a commissioned ship of that country, their laws apply on board. The commissioned ship has a sovereign immunity and is immune, and the crew is immune from arrest, search, and inspection, and immune from any assertions of jurisdiction by any other state. So obviously the Sierra Madre, in this case, is immune from the Chinese boarding that ship. That is basically considered an act of war. Also, this doesn't really apply to the Sierra Madre, but it does for the Teresa Magbanua, is freedom of passage in territorial waters and transit rights in international waters. So the Sierra Madre, being a commissioned ship, is allowed to be in the territorial waters, and the West Philippine Seas around the Second Thomas Shoal is territorial waters as far as the exclusive economic zones, not coastal waters, but the territorial waters of the Philippines. So it has a right to be there. And so what the Chinese are saying is they are saying that it is not a decommissioned ship. So that means that they go into the belief that they can go in there, and since it's not a commissioned ship, it does not have sovereign rights. And it's the laws of the Philippines do not apply. The Chinese passed a law back in July where they could say they could arrest any trespassers in the South China Sea and jail them without trial in China for, I think, up to 6 months. So if it's not a decommissioned ship and it has no sovereign rights, they could just, China is saying, well, it's not a commissioned ship. We don't recognize it as such. And we're just going to go in there, arrest the crew because they have no sovereign immunity and they're trespassing on Chinese territorial waters. I'm just stating the Chinese position, not agreeing with it. And at that point, the ship is abandoned. And at that point, because China claims that the South China Sea is their sovereign territory, they have the rights to tow it away. They are the ones that can salvage the ship because it's not in what they believe is international waters, but the Chinese think that's territorial waters, and it is free for them to do so. Obviously, the Philippines would not see it that way, and for the most part, the entire international community would not see it that way. Would the Chinese be so bold to attempt that? Probably not, but they are definitely thinking it, and it's just part of those low escalations. The Philippines do say that they have a contingency plan if the Chinese ever try to tow the Sierra Madre away. They didn't release what those plans were, and that is an appropriate action because you would not want to telegraph what to the Chinese, what's your way of preventing them from towing away the Sierra Madre. Could be a bluff, but also if it's not a bluff, you don't want to sit there and you don't want to telegraph how you can stop the Chinese from taking this action. So the Chinese logic about not recognizing the commission, the rights of a commissioned naval ship, they have also threatened, the Chinese have also threatened to tow away the Teresa Magbanua, saying it's trespassing. Now, it's going to be a lot harder because that's a mobile ship. It is not grounded. It still has mobility and can sail through international water. How do you tow a ship that is still under power? The Sierra Madre, again, a commissioned ship, but it does not have internal the ability at this point. It's been there since 1999. Pretty sure that it's not going to be able to run on its own power as far as propulsion goes. That is not an issue with the Teresa Magbanua. So that means they would have to do something to disable the Teresa Magbanua to tow it away. That, again, pushes into the act of war. And that we can go into some of the issues with the U.S. Navy's or the U.S. and the Philippines Defense Agreement, which has been in effect since 1951. That would be in effect. So if they tried to do that to the Teresa Magbanua, it would actually trigger the U.S. Defense Agreement. Now, briefly saying is the agreement with the U.S. When they clarified the position of the U.S. Philippine Defense Agreement, they provided China with some clarification, or the world for some clarification, is the treaty would be enacted if China used naval vessels and not Coast Guard vessels against Philippine ships. We have seen more and more cases where the Chinese People's Liberation Army Navy has been in the area, but they have not been active participants. They have left it to the Coast Guard to enact China's illegal claims. The U.S. says as long as naval vessels are not being used, it would not enact the defense agreement with the Philippines. The other one is China. If China directly attacks and kills Philippine forces, that would bring the defense alliance into full effect. And any accidental clash between the Philippines and China that escalates into China using deadly force against the Philippine Navy and Coast Guard assets. So that's one of those cases where it's really kind of addressing the gray zone tactics of where the gray zone operates, where these civilian Chinese military or maritime militia do something like, for example, they interfere with a Philippine ship, maybe endangering the Philippine ship, maybe doing radical maneuvers in front of a Philippine ship. The Philippine ship rams I'm just, again, this is all scenario. It rams the maritime militia ship and it kills a person on board. The Chinese use that as an escalation, that the Philippines use their forces to act out against civilians and killing civilians, and that the Chinese would take actions to retaliate for the killing of its citizens in the South China Sea. That would be an example of an escalation. That last point of the U.S. Clarification of what could trigger the defense agreement, that was an example of that. They were trying to cover for anything that the most likely gray zone tactic to try to purposely escalate a situation. So those are the things where where the U.S. and the Philippines are working together to try to get some form of clarification. Now, this all again stems from the idea that the Philippines refused to comply with China's demands. Well, the Chinese rhetoric has definitely increased. They're getting more and more frustrated that they're not able to get the Philippines to comply. It's hard for them to deal with the defense treaty with the United States. And like many other, the Marcos is the president of the Philippines, President Ferdinand Marcos Jr., is willing to expose China's illegal and excessive use of force in the Philippine Exclusive Economic Zone. And it is actually motivating other countries, such as Vietnam, to be more assertive in its claims. So China, this was called the Transparency Initiative. This came when Ferdinand Marcos went to visit Beijing, and with the attempt to try to smooth over relations with the Chinese and try to reach some understanding in the West Philippine Sea. And he was rudely and coldly welcomed by the Chinese. Welcome is a stretch of the word. And at that point, he saw that there was no use in trying to negotiate with the Chinese, because the Chinese were going to be uncompromising about their position. So that's when he came out with what was called the Transparency Initiative. And that's why you see so much of what's going on in the South China, where you have cameras there and it's well documented. That is part of the Transparency Initiative, and it's broadcasted out. And that was embarrassing to China, because China could no longer hide behind the fact that what it was doing was that it was broadcasted to the world and wasn't in the shadows anymore like they prefer to do it. Now, the Transparency Initiative caught the Chinese and the U.S. off guard. And the Chinese response to the Transparency Initiative has been like, I've said this before, like a petulant child. They've doubled down on the aggression after the embarrassment of being shown that they were, how they were acting. So they basically have doubled down on that. And Philippines has maintained the Transparency Initiative. So sometimes there's a little bit of trying to beat both sides are trying to get to the press as soon as possible to tell their side of the story. And that's one of the reactions to the Transparency Initiative, too, is it's created this war of words. And the actions of the Philippines have, again, it's been an embarrassment to China. China does not know really how to act to this, because they've been able to use their position as being the dominant economic and military power in that region. The U.S. is obviously bigger, but it's not actually, we have bases, but we're not, China's there. It's in the region. It has a high level of sway in there. They're used to kind of getting their own way, and the Philippines have frustrated them. Now, the issue with China is because they've not been able to get the Philippines to comply. They have not. It has actually started to spread. The Philippines Transparency Initiative has gotten favoritism from NATO, the European Union. You're seeing NATO countries like France, Great Britain, operating now, Canada operating in closely with the Philippines. Same with the Japanese. Japanese have signed some reciprocal agreements with the Philippines and have agreed to provide them more capable ships in their disputes with China. You're seeing India agreeing with the Philippines and have actually sold them supersonic BrahMos cruise missiles, which would be an issue for China to deal with. And so you're seeing that the exposure of the aggressiveness of China is all out there to see, and it has caused a reaction across the globe that has been negative to China. So it has been successful in that regard. The issue with the Philippines' success is a couple things they have going for them. I've talked about this before. The U.S. Defense Treaty with the Philippines. That is hard for China to counter because if they go too aggressive with the Philippines, it could initiate that agreement, and then they can find themselves at a shooting war with the U.S. The shooting war with the U.S. in the Philippines is problematic for the Chinese because the Chinese are still hemmed in by the first island chain. And that is going to be very hard because China does not have an effective carrier fleet, not yet anyway, to operate around the Philippines. It is hard for China to extend their main power air cover all the way to the Philippines and operate effectively, especially when you're talking about U.S., Japan, and other forces based around the Philippines would not have to fly near as far. So again, you got no effective air cover. So China's in the position where they can try to force the question of Taiwan before they can really effectively address a war in the Philippines. It's not a war that they're able to fight as long as Taiwan question remains outside of Chinese control. So that's kind of what's hemming them in, is that they can't act overly aggressive. The one thing China can do, and this is a concern because the previous president, Duterte, was a little bit more, I don't want to say he was pro-Chinese, but he was a little bit more leaning towards the Chinese side than the U.S. side, where Marcos is pretty much the opposite. So he tried to find his way forward to try to get some type of agreement with the Chinese to not be so aggressive and kind of let the Chinese have a little bit more leeway in the West Philippine Sea than what you see with Marcos and his Transparency Initiative. The prior president, Duarte's daughter, is the most likely front runner for presidency when Marcos's six-year term ends. And so China might be just waiting it out, maybe hoping that the Philippine people will get so tired of these escalations. So China will keep this low boiling escalations up in the Philippines, West Philippine Sea, that the Philippine people get tired of it and will just relent and just elect somebody that's more favorable to China. So China might be saying, well, if we could just change the electoral feelings of the Philippine people, maybe we can find a way to get our way in the West Philippine Sea without having to address the Taiwan question immediately. So again, a lot of accusations going back and forth in the West Philippine Sea, not a lot of physical confrontations, which is positive, but some of these things that are being discussed, especially the idea of towing away both the Sierra Madre and the Teresa Magbanua, could be problematic. And it also shows the lack of respect for international law that China really has. International law means nothing to them if it restrains China. It means everything to China if it restrains China's adversaries. A very well, nobody's surprised. It's a very duplicitous way of how it approaches law. Whatever's best for China is how they interpret it. So, sure, more to come on that. I just thought it was interesting that they were talking about violating what a commissioned ship is and all the things that could come from that. All right, so the last paper is as the summer campaign season wind down, peace talks are on the menu, maybe. So there obviously has been a lot of activity in Ukraine over the last 6 weeks or so. And I keep talking about the summer campaign season is coming to an end. And that's because the rains are going to start in October. So cross-country movement, it will be much harder to do. And they basically have to wait till, obviously hard roads are not affected, but when you're fighting a war on a continuous front, a lot of cross-country movement. Cross-country movement is very hard in that part of the region. If you, especially when you're talking about heavier and heavier military vehicles, it's very hard to operate in these areas at the end of the summer season. So when the fall of rain starts, many roads will become impassable. The more a heavy vehicle drives over it, the more damages. It's harder for the next vehicle coming behind it. So it is a significant issue, and usually full mobility is not restored in these parts of the world until after the winter starts and the cold weather refreezes the ground and hardens it and restores cross-country movement. So that's why I keep talking about the summer offensive season is coming to an end, because there will be, Mother Nature will enforce at least some level of reduced military activity in this area of the world. So in this time period, the Russians have seized 390 additional square miles of the Donbass, and that's roughly running from August to the early part of September, threatening a strategic location in the Donbass called Pokrovsk. And that is a logistical hub in the Donbass that allows supplies. It's a rail hub, it's a road hub that allows for the logistical supply of Ukrainian armed forces in pretty much all of that region of the country. If that falls, it doesn't mean that the Ukrainians are going to retreat out of the Donbass region and give up that territory to the Russians. It will just be much, much harder for them to supply their forces, and they might have to pull back their lines because to make them more to be able to supply the lines, because basically without the logistics hub cut, it's going to be harder to resupply their forces in the region. So they might have to retreat just to get back into a more favorable supply position. It's very easy when the winter offensive comes that if they take Pokrovsk, it will be easier for the Russians to isolate Ukrainian units, which will have to get supplies at a lower volume than what they're currently getting and at a longer rate, because you figure like maybe that turns around, maybe the 50-mile supply line turns into a 200-mile supply line to get around the loss of the region. Also, it's easier to disrupt longer supply lines. So it is not a favorable situation at all for the Ukrainians, the possible loss of the city. And the city doesn't even have to be captured. You could just cut the road network and the railroad network around the city without taking the city itself. And you just basically make it inert as a logistics hub to the Ukrainian forces. So they're driving hard for that, they're being the Russians. The Ukrainians, for their part, and this is where some of the speculation of why the Ukrainians have invaded the Kursk region and have occupied 480 square miles of Russian territory to the north. The idea was that first off, maybe Ukraine, and I believe this because I've talked about this before, Ukraine needed some type of win, some type of negotiating bargain for upcoming peace talks, which they hope to start in November. That's what they publicly state, meaning the Ukrainian president. they needed to have some type of bargaining chip to be able to induce the Russians to come to the bargaining table. The other one is that the idea is that seizing the Kursk region will create another buffer zone to basically prevent Russian artillery missile attacks from being launched to Kyiv from these regions. So just another way to push them back. So that's another idea. I think that, again, you're going to run into the rain season. It's going to be harder to maintain these forces. So it's unclear what it's going to do, but obviously two big escalatory issues. It was a public morale blow or a prestige blow to Putin to have the Kursk region occupied by the Ukrainians. Pokrovsk is probably a more serious issue for the Ukrainians. The other issue is that the Kursk operation was meant to draw forces off the Donbass to take the pressure off Pokrovsk. That hasn't really happened either. So it's a lot of activity happening in the eastern part of Ukraine and the northern part of Ukraine, and again, parts of Russia. The Kursk operation ended these low-profile negotiations between Russia and Ukraine, hosted by Qatar, who was trying to get both sides to agree to stop attacking each other's energy infrastructure. Qatar was probably more interested from the perspective of trying to prevent Ukrainian attacks on Russian oil and gas installations and disrupting the world supply of oil, because again, Qatar is part of the Persian Gulf OPEC nations. Also, Ukraine allows Russian oil to be still, even in this war, allows the transfer of Russian oil across pipelines that run across Ukraine. So obviously Ukraine could try to cut those off or allow them to be destroyed. So Qatar was trying to negotiate something where the oil infrastructure, the energy infrastructure, which includes oil, gas, electricity, also I think hydroelectric, was off limits to both sides' attack. So there was some negotiations between the countries to try to reach some type of agreement. And the hope was that maybe this small agreement could lead to a bigger comprehensive ceasefire, not an end to the war, but just something where there was actual ceasefire. Those negotiations ended. The Russians walked out after the Kursk operation was launched in protest. Again, more grandstanding, more face saving. It's, Russia can invade Ukraine, but Ukraine can't invade Russia. So Russia trying to play the victim and all that. I wrote about that too, about how I think that how the Ukrainians should handle operations in Kursk, especially when capturing POWs. But those negotiations ended due to the Kursk operation. So, and then on top of that, so we lost low-level peace talks. We got operations in the Donbass around Pokrovsk, and the danger, not mortal danger, but danger to Ukrainian forces in the Donbass. You got the Kursk operations. You got ending of peace talks due to the Kursk operation, and then the U.S. and Great Britain are meeting this week to discuss removing restrictions of U.S.-made weapons that are donated to Ukraine, allowing them to attack targets deeper into Russia. And that was part of the issue that was in my first story about some of the issues that Poland is dealing with Medvedev talking about trying to occupy all of Ukraine due to the talk about allowing these longer range U.S. weapons to be donated and to be freely used by Ukraine to attack any target throughout Russia. So that was an issue that all this seems to be escalatory. Again, Russia has issued a red line saying that this, in effect, is Russia declaring war or NATO declaring war on Russia because of this. And the Russian point of view, I think it actually came up at the UN Security Council, where the Russian ambassador to the UN Security Council stated that accused the West, NATO, mainly the United States, but NATO in general, that they were going to declare war on Russia because these long-range missiles would not be programmed or could not be programmed by Ukrainian forces, but would require NATO to provide all the targeting information and upload them into the missiles themselves. So that it was the case the Russians were making is the West, the U.S., Great Britain mainly, Germany to a much lesser extent. Germany's limiting the area, kind of like with the U.S., of just allowing their weapons to be used on Russian territory around Kharkiv. So this is a red line. Obviously, Russia has issued lots of red lines that have not done anything. So you wonder at what point when is one red line too much? Is this going to be it? It's unclear. It just depends, I guess, how these weapons are going to be used and what the final U.S. decision is going to be made. Speculating that it's doubtful that the U.S. will make any major changes to its restrictions prior to the U.S. allowing U.S. weapons to be used in Russian territory around Kharkiv, which the Germans followed in nearly exact rules. It was speculated that the U.S. was going to lift all restrictions, and they didn't. I don't see any indications that the U.S. is going to fully release or going to change its restrictions that much, even though it seems like the United Kingdom is pushing for a wider use of weapons or allowing the U.S. to allow its U.S. weapons in Ukraine to be used for strikes inside Russia, outside Kharkiv. So again, another red line. So again, a lot of escalations going on in a very short time period prior to the end of the summer campaign season. So this week, Germany has been a supporter. Chancellor Olaf Scholz has been a supporter of Ukraine, but it has been somewhat cautious, much to the frustration of France and to the United Kingdom, in not wanting to provide, straddle that line of wanting to provide appropriate and lethal aid to the Ukrainians to defend against the invasion, but not to attack Russian territory itself. So the Germans have been very somewhat cautious, not wanting to create an escalation of the war in the weapons that it has given Ukraine, but it also wants to provide more weapons to the Ukrainians. Now, Germany has announced, and this was as Germany kind of struggles to try to get to the 2% target goal on a sustained basis, where it looks like this year they're over the 2% goal, GDP goal. They are struggling in future budgets to get there. The reason why they got there this year and last year was the 100 billion euro special fund pushed their GDP numbers over 2%. They're having an issue trying to keep that, to get it over that level. So Germany has talked about reducing the financial support to Ukraine in 2025, citing the loan that was given at the G7 summit, where the proceeds, basically the interest from frozen Russian assets in the West, would be used to guarantee a loan to Ukraine. Germany is using that purpose, saying, hey, we gave you, I can't remember, I think it was like $52 billion loan to Ukraine. That the Germans are saying, okay, we're going to reduce our support to Ukraine due to that loan. So that's kind of it's been, so now it's kind of looking like Germany's getting a little bit softer on its support. Also, Germany had the ruling coalition of Chancellor Scholz took quite a beating in eastern Germany last week, and his coalition was pushed much farther down the line, and to the horror of many, the AfD had become not the majority party, but the largest single party in two German states in the east. So this shows a level of political weakness within Schultz's coalition. So he's looking to get he's got under financial pressure, budget pressures, and the issue in the East was immigration was a big issue for the AFD, but also the continued support of the war has been a pushback point for in the East as well. So the chancellor is looking at possibilities of how can this war come to the end. So he met with President Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, in Frankfurt in early September, and he placed pressure on them to accelerate the peace process and negotiate with Russia to end the war. So this is the first major power to come out this directly to say, yeah, the war needs to end. It needs to be attacked. And they're backing it up by reducing the amount of support that is being given to Ukraine. Also, as they struggle to get up to those 2% GDP goal, it will be interesting to see how German budgets do if peace does come. Will they feel like they don't have to maintain that 2% goal, and they will go back into their old ways of a 1.4%? It'll be interesting to see what happens in Germany. But this is the first major push by a major European power to call for an end of the war while at the same time reducing its aid. Now, again, it cites the loan, but that means that he doesn't have to go through the political fight of securing more funding for the war, and he's just using that reason for that loan using Russian assets, or the interest from Russian assets. So on the other side, you got Turkey playing a very, very confusing role. So President Erdogan of Turkey has maintained positive relationships with both Russia and Ukraine. He created the blueprint for a ceasefire in 2022. He has gone back and he has approached both parties at various times trying to restart the peace process using the blueprint of a ceasefire created in 2022, which both Russia and Ukraine have said is an acceptable blueprint for discussions of peace, but neither party has really been under pressure to restart negotiations. Turkey is not a big enough country to try to force some type of negotiation, but it continues to try, and it has actually had a laudable. You have to give them credit, President Erdogan, for trying to advance peace without trying to be a party, being a cheerleader for either party. He also negotiated the Black Sea Grain Initiative, which allowed the shipping of Ukrainian grain and agricultural products out of the Black Sea without having threat of Russian attacks. There was an attack in Romania this week where a Ukrainian ship was attacked by the Russians, but the Black Sea Grain Initiative is not in effect anymore. They found a workaround to it. But this was an ability to show that Turkey was able to talk with both sides. And this was something that was able to not prevent a world famine, but it brought price stabilization to the world food market. So countries and people would not have to decide whether to buy food or any other basic necessities. So it was again, he didn't say President Erdogan didn't save the world from a great famine, but it did provide food stabilization, food price stabilization in the world market, which does play a significant role in maintaining societies. A society becomes highly unstable when food becomes way too expensive or is scarce. So that was credible that he had done that, and shows that he did have favorable relations with both sides. So the Erdogan, having done this, and it just talks about it, is that he came out with this controversial statement this week and said that there was some type of meeting with Crimean interests, wasn't necessarily Ukrainian, more about the people that live in Crimea. But I think Ukraine has some interest because they claim Crimea as their own. he stated that Crimea needs to be returned back to Ukraine for the end of the war. And he talked about things like the Crimean Tatars needing a homeland. He really went down a path. And again, Crimea is part of the Black Sea. Turkey is a power player in the Black Sea region. So it's obviously Turkey does know about some of the social situation in Crimea, but he directly called for the return of Crimea. And he stated that all the territory in the Donbass that Russia annexed in September 2022 needs to go back to Ukraine. And this aligns with President Zelensky's 10-point peace plan, which says that all captured territory from 2014, that's when Crimea was seized from Ukraine, and all the territory seized and annexed by the Russians have to be returned to Ukraine. And that was part of Zelensky's 10-point peace plan, which is not really a blueprint for peace. It's more of a wish list and a dictation of how peace has to look like. It's not a serious peace formula. Again, it's not saying it's unfair to what the Ukrainians want to achieve, but there's a lot of fluff in it, and it's basically a non-starter. Basically, the core of the 10-point peace plan, President Erdogan came out and agreed to this, and this is a peace plan that has been absolutely rejected by the Russians. So it's like, is he choosing a side to go with the NATO point of view, the Western EU point of view? Well, brings some big questions. But Turkey has also showed interest in joining the Russian-led BRICS organization. I wrote about this last week too. So he wants to join this new developing, or not new, but this wants to join this Global South initiative, which is a structure of what's called the Global South, or developing nations, to displace the current economic and world order that is often led by the G7. You're talking about the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, the UN in its current structure, the dominant of the dollar and Western financial systems. So BRICS is wanting to displace this. Turkey is wanting to join this. It is an organization, I call it politically led by the Russians, very closely by the Chinese, economically led by the Chinese. So he's wanting to join something that is directly in contrast to the West. At the same time, he's saying, okay, I agree, Crimea and the Donbass have to go back to Ukraine as any peace deal, which is contrary to his blueprint for 2022 ceasefire. He says it has to go back as a permanent settlement. Okay, fair enough, but that's in direct contrast to contradiction to Vladimir Putin, who has outright rejected it. And he had that long explanation of how the Ukraine is not really a country, blah, blah, blah. So it definitely throws in the face of Vladimir Putin. And at the same time, he's wanting, or near the same time, he's wanting to join the Russian organization of BRICS and align himself economically and somewhat politically with BRICS and away from Europe. Now, Turkey, as I said, wrote last week, is 95% Asian, 5% European. It is considered, if you have just one part of your territory, you're considered a European country. They have applied for EU membership. It has been on the back burner since 2005 through no help and some of the way Erdogan acts out with like threatening Greece with missile attacks and calling Germany a enemy of Turkey. And so he's always done all these things, and then lied on human rights in his reaction to the 2016 coup attempt. So all these several things. So like, what is Turkey doing? So they're sitting there, they buy Russian SA-400 surface-to-air missiles. They hold up Turkey and Finland joining NATO. They maintain positive relationships with both Ukraine and Russia. They want to join Russia at BRICS, but they want to also support now the Ukrainian peace plan of territorial integrity. What are they trying to do? So it seems like Erdogan is trying to play off the world as far as where it sits in the world. And so are they trying to get some type of um, uh, favorability from the European Union to say, okay, we'll finally accept your application if you drop your BRICS application? Russia, though, even though Putin or Erdogan has turned against Russia in the demands for peace, it would be a public relations win for him to accept Turkey, a NATO country, into BRICS. It would be a fly in the face of NATO, of having a NATO country and being part of BRICS. It would be absolute. It would be a public relations coup for Russia. It would cause all types of problems with NATO. It would probably cause not the end of NATO, but it would cause issues with unity of NATO. NATO doesn't have a trigger of kicking anybody out, but even if you did, would you want to kick Turkey out? So Turkey seems to be is making a push for peace, but also making a push for realignment. I don't know how that's going to work out in the negotiations. Now, that has basically, all that he said is Turkey, though it has been successful in negotiating with both Ukraine and Russia, it had a blueprint for peace or ceasefire that both agreed to. They negotiated the Black Sea Grain Initiative, which both countries agreed to. Turkey has basically thrown themselves out of any contention of being a country that could be a neutral arbiter in these cases. They have got the suspicion, Turkey has the suspicion of the European Union. He's not necessarily a friend of Vladimir Putin, but Vladimir Putin will probably accept him in the BRICS as a way to leverage into NATO and into European politics and cause destabilization. So Turkey is out. Ukraine's not going to trust them, but the Europeans are not going to trust them. So Turkey is out of the area. So now the questions come in is who can be a country to neutrally to arbitrate the end of the war? Again, Germany is pushing for an end of the war and is taking positive steps, maybe if not from the Ukrainian point of view, but I'm talking about positive steps. They're actually doing something beyond rhetoric to exit out of the war, mainly because due to politics and due to budget constraints of trying to continue this war that appears to be going nowhere fast. So the what's coming up now is India, and its Prime Minister Modi seems to be the front runner to be the arbiter to at least start and get the peace talks on a sustainable path. India has favorable relationships with Russia and Ukraine, and Prime Minister Modi did visit both countries last month. Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni has said that India is the right country to lead negotiations to end the war. So India is not part of the G7. It's not part of Europe. It does buy Russian oil, but within the rules of the sanction regime that the West has imposed. It is part of BRICS, so it does have an alignment with Russia, but it's also in the same organization with China, which India is becoming an economic powerhouse at the expense of China, and it has sided against China in the South China Sea, and along with the U.S., Philippines, Japan, Australia, New Zealand coalition that's forming against to counter the Chinese aggression in the South China Sea. India has weighed in, not to jump into the disagreement, but has sided with the Philippines, has sold the Philippines weapons. So India has been it has relations with both Europe and Russia. It is in the same economic organization as China, but it's a counterweight to China. It is a large country, the biggest population in the world, and it has made India, since it has become independent from British rule, has worked to try to keep itself out of international binding international agreements and blocks. So it wants to be basically it doesn't want to be tied into like a NATO or any type of security arrangement in those acts. It wants to act independently for its own interests. India is also a nuclear power. It does have some on again, off again conflicts with Pakistan. Has some border disputes with China, but for the most part, it has kept itself extracted out of wars. It has shown itself as being generally a responsible international partner. So it has the stature. It's got the neutral point of view that can be agreed to by pretty much most of the world. So this seems like India is coming up as the primary country to lead the peace talks, and they're starting to move that way. Again, you got the Italian prime minister at the same time, roughly at the same time that Germany is talking about, hey, we need an end to the war. She's calling that India is that country to lead it, and they seem like the most likely one. And though they haven't been advertising it, they have been in the background working towards trying to build momentum for peace talks. Again, had meetings with Russia, had meetings with Ukraine. They have talked to OPEC nations, which Russia is part of OPEC Plus, and has had some interest in talking with both the Chinese and the Russians, along with OPEC nations, mainly Saudi Arabia, having generally good relations with the United States. So it seems like India is in that position where it's starting to gather, it has the support, but it's also trying to gather the coalition to support starting to discuss peace. Now, I've talked about this before, talked last week, talked about this week, is that President Zelensky is trying to get peace talks started, direct contact peace talks with the Russians in November. The Russians haven't agreed to it. They haven't necessarily rejected them either. So also the issues is there seems to be some concern in Russia about continuing the war and some of the societal pressure, some of the economic pressure, because more and more economic pressure is going to be put on the Chinese for selling dual-use items. If the Chinese start getting, and their Chinese economy is suffering as well. So if the Chinese economy starts getting hit with more Western sanctions, and it's already in a relatively weak state, the slowest growth it's had in decades, high levels of debt, it's got a real estate crisis. Its society cannot take a lot of more Western sanctions. So it's not going, its trade with the West is much greater than the trade with Russia. So it's going to be under pressure to start exerting onto the Russians to end this war. And I've written about this several times, is the Ukrainian, I don't know if he's still in place because they just made a major shakeup in the Ukrainian government, that the deputy head of the military intelligence in Ukraine had stated that the war would go through its course through 2024 and that a negotiated settlement would occur in 2025. I also wrote about it is that the bond restructuring in Ukraine that was approved, it was the write-off of Ukrainian debt was given with some assurances that peace was in the future. Otherwise, they would not have forgiven the debt. At least in my opinion, and having read a number of financial papers, is that they would not have forgiven debt if they didn't think that there's a way out of the war. So lots of indications that war is a way to get out of this war by 2025 seems to be in the offing. The Ukrainian population is becoming softer on the issue. Not saying they're willing to give up territory, but they seem to be willing to negotiate more and more with the Russians. Russians have their own societal issues. The potential for loose tightening of Chinese support is going to become an issue. So it seems to be all roads at this point seem to be directing that some favorable political tailwinds towards finding a way out of this war in 2025 seem to be in the offing. And it seems like now the inside tracks seem to be a combination of of Turkey and maybe some of the Middle Eastern countries. Now it seems to be moving to India. So more to come. It's always been something that's been of interest to me, but it seems like things are definitely moving again in the direction. And even when I wrote, it said that we'd have to go through the campaign season of the end of the summer campaign season before the Russians would be thinking about coming to the bargaining table. So that also seems to be playing into it. So we will see. So that is it for today or this week. Thank you for all the new subscribers. I greatly appreciate it. And all the subscribers that have been with me. Always appreciate your support. If you know anybody that's interested in this type of topic, please make recommendations to my work. I'd be greatly appreciated. It helps always having more and more followers because it gives you some level of credibility in what you're writing. Also, if you feel up to it, consider becoming a paid subscriber. If I see more paid subscribers, I only have 3. I will start thinking about exclusive content. Or if you just want to support me through Patreon, the link will be in the description section of this podcast. So thank you, everybody, for your support this week. I've had some really good messages this week. I haven't had, surprisingly, no snarky comments on YouTube or on Rumble or on X. And had some positive conversations on Substack, which is always enjoyable talking to people on that. So again, thank you, everybody. I hope you have a great rest of your weekend, and we will talk to you next week. Bye.